hopefully the video will be up, but if not, you got it on whatever it is you're doing. How you doing, Amy? Thomas? Yeah.
Hello.
All right. We're going to start with the left hand, since this is the left skeleton. And we're going to have two obvious bony landmarks at the wrist. What do you think they are?
Styloid process.
Well, how about just the distal end, right? We don't even have to go to the styloid. Distal end. If you turn your wrist over, you should have one of these bones stick out very prominently. That little round thing right there, that is the head of the ulnar. The head of the radius is proximal, head of the ulna is distal. So try not to get out of the habit of saying medial lateral, because when you're pronated, this looks medial when it's actually lateral. So we say radial and ulnar. Radial side is always on the thumb side, ulnar side is on the pinky side. So you say hang loose, right? It's a Hawaii thing, right? So when I come down and I palpate, it's not going to be super prominent, but it's going to be obvious. There's bones right there. That's the head of the ulna, and if I come around a little bit more lateral, oops, see what happened? I went lateral. Ulnarly, there's a little point there. That little point is the styloid process. Now, in some people, it's more prominent than others. On the radial side, come to the distal end, and there's the styloid process of the radius. Coming dorsally from the styloid process of the radius, I'm just going to come on the top. This head of the ulna is quite prominent, so that's an obvious bony landmark. But on the radial side, there's another bump. Do you feel that? Mm-hmm. That is called Lister's tubercle, or the dorsal tubercle of the radius. That's the tubercle in which the extensor pollicis longus goes around. Pulley. Acts like a pulley. And I think Steve talked about that in anatomy. Good? So now we've got Lister's tubercle. We've got the head of the ulna, styloid process of the ulna, styloid process of the radius. Good? All right. Now, on the palmar side, or volar side, or anterior side, that's sad that there's so many ways of discussing it, we've got a lot of meat. I've got my hypothenar and thenar eminences, right? I've got 8 tendons, superficialis and profundus, right? That run right through that carpal tunnel. So it's hard to palpate things on the volar or palmar surface. So we're going to palpate most of the bones on the dorsal side. However, there's a few things we're going to palpate on the volar side. So let's start with the proximal row. The proximal row is convex on concave. So therefore, when my hand or wrist moves this direction, the bones, or the proximal row of bones, will move that direction, in the opposite direction. When I move this way, my bones will move in the opposite direction as well. That will come into play. That will help us find bones when we're wiggling them around. Starting with one of the more important bones, the scaphoid, which is the main weight-bearing bone of the wrist, it commonly gets fractured. So we got to make sure that that's not fractured, even though the doctor and the PT say it's not. One easy way to screen for that is take a tuning fork. I'll go over this next quarter, but I'm trying to lead you into where we're going with this. Bing! I go into my anatomical snuff box. Whenever I put a tuning fork or vibrate bone, it will tickle, unless it's fractured. And then it will hurt. And it will hurt very much. Ow! You know? All right, so we can actually palpate that scaphoid on the dorsal side and the volar side and the lateral side. So we know from lecture this morning that we can actually palpate it in the snuff box. So when I palpate, I just say, lift your thumb for me. There's the anatomical snuff box. I say, relax. I know that my landmark is the styloid process. I come off that, and I go into this little dip. When I, relax. Let me do the motion. When I ulnarly deviate, the bone is going this way, so therefore the bone glides this way. And I feel that bone pop in. Put your finger right there. And it... It's like a toaster. Bloop, bloop. All right. Once I know where that is, I can come on the dorsal side, and I said, well, when I first drop off behind that styloid process, what's there? The scaphoid. On the volar side, there's this ridge right there. It's not very prominent on this person, but there's a ridge called the ridge of the scaphoid, and that is one of the 4 pillars of the carpal tunnel. Good? All right. So, anatomical snuff box, dorsal side of the distal radius, palmar side of the distal radius, and I'm going to palpate that scaphoid on 1, 2, and 3 sides. The next bone from the scaphoid is the lunate. If you had to guess, what would be a good bony landmark for that lunate? Kind of like right between, right? Right between the two. So if I see his head of the ulna, and I go just to the radial side of that, I'm going to drop into a little dip. When I drop into a little dip, all I have to do is come just distal, and I should be, feel that? On the lunate. And it should pop into my hand more so when I flex, less so when I extend. Good? So I did some levers. Now the next 2 I do at the same time. Pisiform is an obvious bony landmark. The pisiform we can find on the ulnar side of our just distal to our distal wrist crease. Everybody has a distal wrist crease? You see that? Yeah. And I go to the ulnar side and I go, oh, I'm going to go just distal to that. And I can't help but be right smack dab on it. And if you want to, you can actually grab it, and if you can relax, you can move it around. But you got to be able to relax. Now, if you look at it on here, where are we? You see how it, yeah, I have my glasses on. It is directly on top of the triquetrum. So when I palpate the back side or the posterior side of the pisiform, I am on the triquetrum. So pisiform, triquetrum. So I go to his distal wrist crease. He's got an easy one. I go on the direct opposite side of that. So I move his wrist, make sure I'm on the bone, and I'm on the triquetrum on the posterior side. Good? All right. Now, I'm going to palpate, that's the some levers try positions, right? Now I'm going to palpate the distal row. Now the distal row is just like the foot. That means the first metacarpal is going to approximate with the first distal row one, and that is called the trapezium. So, my bony landmark will be the proximal, or the base, of the first metacarpal. So I just take his thumb, I go to the base, and on him you can actually see the bump where the base is. I just palpate that down. There's the base, so I know dropping just off of that, do you feel that bone right there?